There's a kind of knowledge that never made it into a single cookbook, and it's almost gone. Not recipes. Recipes survived fine. What disappeared was the part underneath the recipe, the judgment. Knowing an egg was bad before you cracked it. Knowing bread was done by the sound it made. Knowing exactly when a pot of oil was ready to fry in, using nothing but a burnt matchstick. That knowledge lived in hands, not in books, and when the people who had it were gone, most of it went with them. Here's 15 pieces of it that survived. One of them explains why your grandmother never let apples and potatoes share a shelf. Another involves an eggshell dropped straight into a pot of coffee, on purpose. And one is a loaf of bread that rises without a single grain of yeast, using nothing but bacteria pulled out of thin air. We're counting down. Stay to the end, because the last one is the strangest thing on this entire list, and it explains everything that comes before it. Number 15. The egg that tells on itself. Drop an egg into a bowl of water. If it sinks flat, it's fresh. If it tilts upright, it's aging, but still fine. If it floats, throw it out. That's not folklore. As an egg ages, moisture evaporates through the shell and gets replaced by air. And that air pocket grows until it's buoyant enough to lift the whole egg off the bottom of the bowl. It's basic physics, discovered by cooks who had no fridge, no expiration date, and no interest in getting sick from a bad egg. It still works today, perfectly. Nobody uses it, because a carton now tells you the date. The carton is honestly worse at this job than the water was. Number 14. An eggshell in the coffee pot. Before paper filters, loose coffee grounds were a real problem. They never wanted to settle. So some cooks cracked an egg for breakfast, saved the shell, crushed it, and dropped it straight into the simmering pot. The rough mineral surface of the shell gave the grounds something to cling to, and they'd sink together fast, leaving a clean cup above. It sounds like it shouldn't work. It did, and it turned something headed for the trash into a tool that cost nothing. Paper filters killed this one for good reason. They're simpler. But somewhere, that's a small loss, an entire clever habit made obsolete by a 5-cent piece of paper. Number 13. A pinch of soda for beans that refuse to soften. In places with hard water, dried beans sometimes just won't give up, no matter how long they simmer. The fix was a small pinch of baking soda in the pot. There's real chemistry here. Soda raises the water's alkalinity, and that helps break down the pectin holding the bean's skin firm. But here's the honest part. Cooks argued about this one constantly. Too much soda, and you lose flavor and nutrients along with the toughness. Some swore by it. Their neighbor swore against it and soaked longer instead. Both were right, depending on their water. It's a rare case where the folk trick and the food science mostly agree, and where grandmothers still manage to disagree with each other anyway. Number 12. A skillet that was never actually new. A cast iron pan doesn't come seasoned from the factory. Not really. Not the way it ends up after 20 years of use. Every meal cooked in it left behind a near-invisible layer of polymerized fat, and over time, thousands of meals built up a smooth, black, natural nonstick surface no store-bought coating has ever matched. That's why an inherited skillet was never just a pan. It was a physical record, decades of someone else's cooking baked directly into the iron itself. Scrub it hard with soap and steel wool even once, and you can strip away years of that history in about 90 seconds. Some families still have the same skillet, still in daily use, 100 years old and better than the day it was bought. Number 11. The can that sat by the stove. Nearly every kitchen of a certain era kept one, an old coffee tin, positioned right by the stove, and bacon grease went into it instead of down the drain. Strained through a scrap of cloth, that fat came back out later to fry eggs, grease a pan, or flavor a pot of greens. During the hardest years of the Great Depression, this wasn't a preference, it was arithmetic. Rendered fat stretched a grocery budget that had almost nothing left to stretch. The habit lasted well past the hardship that created it, mostly because it worked, and because throwing away something with a second use in it never quite sat right with the people who'd lived through having nothing. Number 10. The finger that replaced a thermometer. Before proofing drawers, bakers judged rising dough with one floured finger, pressed about half an inch in. Spring back fast and fully, it needs more time. Spring back slow, leaving a small dent, it's ready. Collapse completely and you've gone too far, the bread will come out dense and disappointing. This isn't nostalgia dressed up as science, it's real. Gluten's elasticity changes predictably as fermentation progresses, and a trained finger reads that change faster and more reliably than most kitchen thermometers ever could. It's one of the only tricks on this entire list that never actually disappeared. Serious bakers still do this today, unchanged, because nothing mechanical has beaten it yet. Number 9. Flour that cooked itself into 2 different dishes. In Southern and Cajun kitchens, a roux, just flour cooked slowly in fat, was judged entirely by color, never by a clock. Pale gives you a strong thickener with almost no flavor. Peanut butter brown gives you both. Push it all the way to near black, and you get almost no thickening power left at all, but a smoky, nutty depth that makes gumbo taste like gumbo. Here's the tension that made this a real skill, not a task. A roux can go from perfect to ruined in under 10 seconds. And once it's burnt, there is no saving it, none. You start over from a cold pan. Cook stood over that pot, stirring without stopping for the better part of an hour, because looking away at the wrong moment meant losing dinner entirely. Number 8. When one chicken had to feed 12 people. During the Depression, stretching meat wasn't about cutting smaller portions. It was about building an entire dish designed around a small amount of protein doing an outsized job. One chicken, simmered whole into broth, became the base for a pot of soft dumplings and thick gravy, substantial enough to feed a family 2 or 3 times larger than the bird alone ever could. The chicken flavored the meal. The dumplings fed it. This kind of stretching existed long before the Depression, but hard times spread it everywhere, fast, because suddenly every household was doing the same math at the same time, whether they wanted to or not. Number 7. Why vegetables got a shock of ice water first. Before jars of vegetables went into the cellar for winter, they got a fast plunge into boiling water, then straight into an ice bath, a step called blanching. Skip it, and something invisible keeps happening inside that sealed jar for months. Enzymes keep quietly breaking down color, flavor, and texture, even after the lid is on. Blanch it right, and that clock stops cold. The timing had to be exact. Too short, and the enzymes barely slow down. Too long, and the vegetable starts actually cooking before it even reaches the jar. This is one of the few tricks where the kitchen wisdom and the food science lined up almost perfectly, discovered by cooks decades before anyone could explain the enzymes involved. Number 6. 2 vegetables that were never allowed near each other. Walk into an old root cellar, and you'd often find potatoes on one shelf, apples on another, deliberately separated, and almost nobody could tell you exactly why, just that you didn't mix them. Here's the answer science eventually confirmed. Apples release a natural gas called ethylene as they ripen. Potatoes sitting near that gas sprout faster and can turn bitter as their starches shift toward growth. Cooks noticed this pattern for generations without a single word of chemistry to explain it. They just knew potatoes near apples went bad sooner, and the rule got passed down as fact long before anyone could say why it was true. It's one of the cleanest examples anywhere of folk observation getting proven right by a laboratory a century later. Number 5. Butter that stayed fresh with no refrigerator at all. Long before refrigeration was standard, a genuinely clever object solved the butter problem. A butter crock, sometimes called a butter bell. Soft butter, packed into a small cup, got inverted into a larger crock, partly filled with cold water, and the water sealed around the butter's edge, blocking out the air and bacteria that spoil it. No moving parts, no electricity, just water doing the job of a refrigerator door. Kept somewhere genuinely cool, a cellar, a spring house, butter stayed fresh for a week or two, sitting right out on the counter the entire time. It's had a quiet comeback, too, mostly among people who just want spreadable butter, most of whom have never once stopped to think about the actual mechanism keeping it fresh under their nose. Number 4. A cold saucer that could read the future of a pot of jam. Long before pectin came in a labeled box, cooks kept a small saucer sitting in the icebox, ready before the fruit ever hit the stove. Partway through boiling the jam, they'd drop a spoonful onto that cold saucer and wait a moment. Push it with a finger. If it wrinkled and held its shape, the jam was set, done, ready for the jar. If it just pooled and ran, back on the heat it went. The trick works because pectin sets as sugar concentration rises and moisture cooks away, and a chilled sample reveals that shift almost instantly, long before the whole pot has any chance to cool down on its own. It's small, it's elegant, and it's a piece of real chemistry, worked out entirely through repetition by people who never once used the word chemistry to describe what they were doing. Number 3. Bread with no yeast at all. Here's the one that stops most people cold. In parts of Appalachia, a bread called salt-rising bread rises without a single grain of commercial or wild yeast, using bacteria instead, pulled from the flour and milk themselves. A starter built from cornmeal, milk, or potato water, and a touch of sugar, got wrapped in blankets and kept warm for hours, sometimes overnight, near the stove. Naturally occurring bacteria in the mixture multiplied and produced gas, the loaf rising through fermentation that has nothing to do with yeast whatsoever. The result is dense, tight-crumbed, and carries a sharp, faintly cheese-like smell some people love and others can't stand at all. It's slow. It's unreliable in a way a packet of yeast never is. And that's exactly why it barely survives today, kept alive by a small number of Appalachian bakers who choose the difficulty on purpose, because the alternative is losing the recipe completely. Number 2, a fire with no dial and no number. For cooks working an open hearth or a wood stove, heat was never a fixed number. It was a moving target, read constantly through the color and behavior of the coals themselves. Bright orange flame, actively licking upward, meant high direct heat, good for a hard sear. A bed of glowing red-orange coals with no visible flame meant something steadier, right for a slow stew or a long bake. Coals fading toward dull gray meant the fire itself was dying, and it was time to feed it or wrap things up. This took years to build, not a lesson, an entire childhood spent near a fire that never behaved the same way twice. People who grew up around it describe the skill as almost automatic by adulthood, a background sense running underneath everything else happening in the kitchen. It's the hardest trick on this entire list, and the one most completely gone, not because it stopped working, but because almost nobody cooks over an open wood-fed fire out of daily necessity anymore. Number 1, the habit underneath every trick on this list. There isn't really a single technique at the top here. There's a habit, the same one running underneath all 14 tricks before it, paying close, repeated attention to what food is actually doing, instead of following instructions about what it's supposed to do. A recipe tells you what should happen. Judgment tells you what is happening, right now, in this exact pot, on this exact stove, today. Cooks built that judgment because for most of history, it was the only tool available to them. Thermometers weren't in every kitchen. Standardized ovens weren't either. So people learned to read steam, read sound, read the give of a potato under a fork, and the spring of dough under one finger. None of that disappeared because it stopped working. It disappeared because convenience made it unnecessary to learn in the first place. A thermometer will tell you oil hit 350 degrees. It won't tell you why someone's grandmother already knew that years before she ever owned one. So here's the real question, and I actually want an answer in the comments. What's one trick your own grandmother, grandfather, or great-aunt used that almost nobody around you seems to know anymore? Tell me the trick. Tell me what state or region it came from. Tell me roughly what decade you remember it from. Some of the best videos on this channel started as a single comment, a piece of knowledge that was never written down anywhere else, and would have simply ended with the person who carried it. Some knowledge is too useful to lose twice. Let's not lose this one.